Hello everyone! Thanks for coming to find out what else I saw in January. Here are all the other movies I watched last month, including many that I learned about from some of you. Our first viewer recommendation is the 1979 short Edward the Conqueror from Tales of the Unexpected, a series based on stories by Roald Dahl. Okay, so this is an episode, not a movie, but it's a twisted story that stars Wendy Hiller and Joseph Cotten as a married couple. He is crotchety and she is eccentric, and when a stray cat shows up, she comes to believe it's the reincarnation of composer Franz Liszt. Her husband thinks that's ridiculous, and then he starts to get jealous. Both Hiller and Cotten are great here, and I wouldn't expect anything less from either of them. But my goodness, does this get dark? I'll say no more. Number 2 is also a viewer recommendation, 1965's Voyage to the Prehistoric Planet. While on a mission in the year 2020 to find life on other planets, the crews of 2 spaceships navigate the surface of Venus, searching for each other and encountering unique creatures and geological marvels. Basil Rathbone is barely in it, but gets top billing as the senior professor at the Lunar Space Station, and Faith Domergue, who I didn't recognize at first, sits in a satellite and relays information to various parties, or something. Honestly, I'm not sure what her job was. The print on YouTube is poor quality with a distracting orange hue that makes a lot of the men look like redheads, but while there are oddities and some funny monsters, it's actually a very interesting space adventure with some decent effects and plot developments. And even if the final twist was a little bit predictable, the movie kept me engaged to the end. So I thought this wasn't too bad. Certainly better than its low IMDb score had me expecting. Then I learned the backstory, and that's where the problem lies. This was sold as a Roger Corman film, but it isn't. Corman bought the rights to a 1962 Soviet film titled Planet of Storms, and then he hired Curtis Harrington to rewrite the script, shoot a few extra scenes with Rathbone and Domergue, and dub over the Russian dialogue to make this a new American movie. Actually, they got 2 movies out of it. This and Queen of Blood were... I just lost my voice a little bit there. This and Queen of Blood were both cobbled together from 3 Soviet films. Corman was criticized for committing, quote, cinematic cannibalism here, and I have to agree, this isn't right. Harrington didn't feel good about it either and insisted his name be left out of the titles for Voyage to the Prehistoric Planet. So, even though I think the movie itself is pretty good for what it is, it does bring it down a peg or two to learn that it's a repackaging of someone else's work that doesn't give them credit. Movie number 3 is a 1953 war film, Sailor of the King, also known as Single-Handed. It's set mainly in 1940 and stars Jeffrey Hunter as a Canadian sailor aboard a British boat that is sunk by the Germans. When he gets picked up by the enemy, he decides he must hinder their progress until, hopefully, the British come. The film co-stars Michael Rennie as a naval commander who makes a connection with Wendy Hiller, yeah, it's her again, who's briefly featured in a very romantic prologue. Bernard Lee is also good here, co-starring as Hunter's fellow survivor, and Peter Van Eyck plays the German commander. A certain facet of the story is not stated, but heavily implied, leaving viewers to draw conclusions for themselves. I think an additional scene might have rounded things out in a more satisfying way, but I did enjoy it as it is. It's an interesting story with some good action, and heck, I always like seeing Jeffrey Hunter. Yeah, boy! Number 4 is a viewer recommendation, a Japanese film from 2020 titled Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes. To put it simply, a man discovers that he can talk to himself 2 minutes in the future through his TV monitor. This was suggested to me based on how enthusiastic I was over the Japanese zombie meta-comedy One Cut of the Dead. While I didn't enjoy this as much as I did that movie, which turned out to be hilarious, it was just as creative and mind-bending, though not in an ouch my brain hurts kind of way. It reminded me of a couple different Twilight Zone episodes. There is quite a bit of repetition in the first half especially, but seeing as that's part of the whole thing and characters actually comment on it, it's unfair to say, oh, this movie is repetitive. It is, of course it is, but that's the nature of the problem. The build-up and payoff to one part was really good, and just when it seemed the movie might have painted itself into a corner, it came up with a random but fun resolution. So I enjoyed it. To anyone who chooses to watch it, I'd say make sure you stay for the behind-the-scenes clips in the credits. They show the cast and crew climbing and jumping all over each other to get these long, complicated takes. And the fact it was so simply made, shot mostly with a smartphone, and yet it looks so smooth, makes it even more impressive. Movie number 5 was a rewatch of 1957's The Enemy Below, in which the captains of an American destroyer and a German submarine go after each other in the South Atlantic. I feel like it goes without saying that this is an excellent war movie. It's no surprise that Robert Mitchum and Kurt Jürgens give equally great performances that are both natural and charismatic. But the supporting cast is solid too. Theodore Bikel is really good as the German XO, a loyal man who listens with much patience and some confusion to his captain's confidence, while David Hedison charmingly plays Mitchum's young XO, and Kurt Kruger appears as the German navigator. Well, I think he's the navigator. I have to say that between Mitchum, Jürgens, Hedison, and Kruger, there are a lot of attractive men in this movie, and I don't remember taking note of that when I saw it the first time in 2015. But I also, on a more serious note, I appreciate that the featured Germans who convey wariness of Nazi sentiment on the sub are played by genuine German or Austrian actors who left Nazi Germany. And I would add that it's worth the time to do a little extra reading on Jürgens, Bikel, and Kruger. Characterizations and performances help set this one apart, as does the lively music composed by Lee Harleen. About that music, it is widely known that The Enemy Below was a big influence on Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and having spent quite a bit of time recently analyzing James Horner's score for that movie, I have to admit I suspect Horner must have listened to the Enemy Below score and sought to imitate it, because there are several cues and phrases in the Khan score that are just too similar for it to be mere coincidence. Now, for me, that takes nothing away from either movie or either score, but it is interesting. Anyway, The Enemy Below was directed by Dick Powell, whose crew figured out a way to make depth charges look absolutely spectacular, and he also made some daring choices with, I'll say, gore, and the story itself, and its departures from its source material. It's a tense film with one of the most thrilling climaxes I've seen in a naval war movie. Number 6 is a viewer recommendation, a short film from Spain titled La Cabina. It's a simple premise: a man gets trapped inside a phone booth. But what follows is a nightmarish half-hour that preys on a litany of fears. Scared of being the center of attention, of having people laugh at you, of losing your freedom of movement, of being enclosed in a tight space? Well, this'll get under your skin, and the lack of a satisfying explanation makes it even more disturbing. Did I like it? I don't know. Did it make me uncomfortable? Yes. And was it memorable? Absolutely. La Cabina can be found on YouTube. It doesn't have subtitles, but if you don't understand Spanish, you can turn on closed captioning for an English translation of the dialogue. You only need it for the first half, though. Once you get to the highway, I would recommend turning closed captions off. Movie number 7 is another rewatch, this one 1940's The Mortal Storm. Jimmy Stewart, Margaret Sullivan, and Robert Young star in this tense drama about a close-knit group of family and friends in Germany torn apart when Hitler is named Chancellor. To my understanding, this is one of Hollywood's first depictions of the murderous tyranny of the Third Reich. It's certainly one of the earliest honest portrayals of concentration camps and Nazi brutality, although the word Jewish is never spoken, and at this point, most Americans didn't know the half of what was really going on. Note also that this came out in 1940, when debate over U.S. involvement in the European War was especially hot. The cast also features Frank Morgan, who did so well in sensitive dramatic performances that I think it's kind of a pity he's only known for The Wizard of Oz, Maria Ouspenskaya, Benita Granville, Robert Stack, and Ward Bond. It's a very good film about family ties, courage, integrity, and conviction, and it holds up very well. History tends to repeat itself, sadly, and a lot of the horrendous policies and attitudes depicted here are familiar because they're being expressed again in our time. I won't go on a rant about that, though, because I know that while it's safe enough to speak in generalities, everyone nods in agreement, when you get into specifics, that's when you start playing with fire, and I'm not remotely interested in having political discussions, which soon turn into political arguments, in my comment section. So I'll just say it's a very good movie, and it's timely. It was timely when I saw it the first time, back in, 2013, and it's still timely today, and I'll move on. Movie number 8 is a movie from 1948 titled Snowbound. I stumbled on this while searching for movies with the title Snowbound, and when I found out that it was war-related and it had Herbert Lom in it, well, I just had to see it. At the behest of a film director and undercover intelligence man played by Robert Newton, Dennis Price's protagonist heads to an Italian ski lodge to search for a woman with a secret identity. He finds instead a host of mysterious personalities all hunting for the same thing. Unfortunately, the version of this movie that's on YouTube isn't great. Had the sound been clearer, it might have been easier to understand the dialogue, but as it is, the fuzziness of the audio, plus some heavy accents, made the confusing plot even more difficult to keep up with. It was interesting, though, with a good setting and an exciting finale and great comic relief from Stanley Holloway, who tells a funny joke about a bear. I might have had a more lukewarm reaction to the picture, though, were it not for my man Herbert Lom, who makes a dramatic entrance, does lots of eye acting, plays the piano, and steals all of his scenes. Had I been in danger of forgetting why I love him, seeing him here would have reminded me. Don't bother to ask why I find him so darn attractive, it's just one of those things. Movie number 9 is 1958's A Time to Love and a Time to Die. This was recommended to me by a couple of people. It's a Douglas Sirk-directed war drama in which John Gavin stars as a German soldier on the raw Russian front. When his 3-week furlough finally comes in, he eagerly returns to Germany, only to find his childhood home bombed out and his parents missing. If you can get beyond the incongruity of some actors' American accents, what you have is a very fine film. It was written and features a cameo by Erich Maria Remarque, and like much of his work, it is a frank anti-war narrative, giving us the perspective of a young man who's found himself on the wrong side of history. It's a gripping story that packs a lot into its 126-minute runtime and touches a range of emotions. I enjoyed it all, except for the ending. John Gavin is surprisingly convincing in his German role, and his winsome leading lady, whose father has been taken away, is played by Swiss actress Lieselotte Pulver. There were also key appearances by Keenan Wynn and Don DeFore. Adding to all that, it's got a good Miklos Rozsa score and great scenery, from the barren, slushy landscape of the Russian front to the mountainous piles of rubble in Germany, and the pockets of untouched beauty that linger even in the bleakest of times. I couldn't believe it, but we accidentally followed that with another movie directed by Douglas Sirk. This one, movie number 10, is 1947's Lord. This viewer recommendation is a noirish thriller in which Scotland Yard is struggling to identify a serial killer who sends them poems about future victims. To assist them in their search, they hire an American taxi dancer, played by Lucille Ball, to work undercover as bait. The result is a great little film with good tension and lots of twists. The remarkable cast includes George Sanders, and this is the movie where he says the line, "I am an unmitigated cad." I was so excited, I was like, he did it! He said the thing! Boris Karloff also makes a brief but delightful appearance parodying his screen image, along with Cedric Hardwicke and Charles Coburn. George Zuko is particularly likable as the policeman assigned to look out for Ball. Nobody thinks of Lucille Ball as a noir actress, but she's really good in this sharp, witty role, and she proves to be an impressive scream queen as well. Another excellent crime thriller she was in was 1946's The Dark Corner, which I highly recommend. The only downside here is that I happened to correctly guess the killer's identity comically early, and that took some wind out of the movie's sails in the third act. But my parents didn't have that problem, so I think it was just me being a little too attentive. Number 11 is the 2004 miniseries North and South. That's right, we finally replaced our copy after ours went kaput last time, right at the beginning of the 4th episode, which is the final episode, and also the best episode. Thank goodness this new one worked, so we got the resolution we were cruelly robbed of before, and now we can watch this disc umpteen times until we wear it out. I've already talked about North and South, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 times here, so I don't know what I can say in a mini review that I haven't said before, except that next year, this period drama turns 20 years old. It hasn't lost its touch, though, and it's still one of our absolute favorites. Movie number 12 has been on my probably should watch this list for a while. It's 1968's Ice Station Zebra. It's a Cold War submarine movie in which Rock Hudson commands a U.S. sub that's given orders to go to a civilian weather station in the Arctic on a rescue mission. But that's just a cover. He's really been assigned to pick up 2 individuals, Patrick McGowan and Ernest Borgnine, headed there on secret and urgent business. This combination sub and spy movie was directed by John Sturges, based on a book by Alistair MacLean, and it has good music by Michel Legrand. I really liked the middle section, where something disastrous occurs and everyone's life is threatened, and it's interesting to see how people respond to this incident, and then the struggle to break through the ice is really exciting. But I found the pacing rather uneven overall. The first 45 minutes are pretty slow, things pick up a lot leading into the intermission and following it, but partway through Act 2 things slow down again so much that the final part, despite being a tense, dramatic showdown, feels overly drawn out. Or at least it did to me, and it did to my dad, and to my mom, but she's seen this part several times, so she was kind of disengaged. She doesn't really like this kind of confrontation that much, and things where people are double-crossing each other. The movie's okay, I liked the whole thing well enough, and really liked the middle, but I'm not sure it needed to be as lengthy as it was. Movie number 13 is 1947's Seven Were Saved, also known as SOS Rescue. It's a post-war disaster and rescue movie about a flight transporting a Japanese war criminal and a few recovering survivors of prison camps to Manila. The plane is hijacked and then crashes in the middle of the Pacific, and those who survive the crash must resist their personal drama in order to stay alive in the tiny raft. First of all, guess who plays the pilot? Richard Denning! You know what that means! Be able to see it there? I don't know. Nope. Gotta shuffle all the owls around so that you can see that, true to my word, I'm keeping... There he is. One may be inclined to call this a poor man's ripoff of the 1944 Hitchcock film Lifeboat, but I am not. I love Lifeboat, and I do see the many similarities. I'm always up for a good story with a plane disaster, or people stranded at sea, or enemies forced to keep each other alive, and this is all 3. The plot isn't tremendously complicated, and all things considered, the group doesn't suffer as much as they could have, but I enjoyed the movie anyway, lightweight as it may have been. Richard Denning, though, he gets to play a very nice, charming man with a take-charge attitude, and he's a good guy all the way, but I thought for sure we would see those sleeves go up. To me, it wasn't a question of if, but when we'd see some brachioradialis under rolled-up, tattered sleeves. But nope, it didn't happen. Not even once. What a disappointment. Next time, buddy. By the way, to those of you who didn't believe me before when I said Richard Denning wasn't a particular favorite of mine and I didn't have a crush on him, let me use some other actors I've talked about in this video as a basis for comparison. Herbert Lom is one of my top favorites and has been for years. I find him inexplicably attractive, and I love him in anything, and if I find a movie and I'm not that interested in the plot, but then I see that he's in it, my interest quadruples and I want to watch it right then. And when he does show up in the movie, as Fran Drescher put it in The Beautician and the Beast, I get a nuts in my stomach. Jeffrey Hunter. I would put him lower on my favorite actors list. He's not on the Herbert Lom, Ronald Colman tier. He's lower than Joseph Cotten. But I find him very appealing, and I've really liked him in everything I've seen him in. And it's not just a looks thing. I think he was a very talented actor who died far too soon. Richard Armitage. Well, I didn't actually mention Richard Armitage when I talked about North and South, but he is the male lead in North and South, and I was absolutely obsessed with him in high school. All of my friends were, because I introduced them all to North and South, and so we kind of had a thing going. I guess I'd put Richard Denning somewhere on the long list of actors I like to see, partly because I appreciate their talent and partly because I find them attractive. But there are a lot of guys who outrank him. Sorry. The sleeve thing, though, he owns that. I can't name a single movie where Herbert Lom rolls his sleeves up. I can't even think what his forearms look like. Jeffrey Hunter, I know I've seen his arms. He's more likely to appear in a t-shirt or with no shirt at all. He may have had them rolled up in The Searchers. I'm especially thinking in the climactic part of the movie. Richard Armitage, to my delight, does appear with his sleeves rolled up a few times near the end of North and South, and it's wonderful. But still, Richard Denning is the reigning champion as far as that goes. Anyway, I'm gonna put this away now. Lastly, movie number 14 is another viewer recommendation, 2009's Alien Trespass. In this homage to classic sci-fi movies, a flying saucer lands during a meteor shower. Monsters start terrifying the townsfolk, while a spaceman on a mission to stop them occupies the body of a scientist, Eric McCormick, and recruits help from a local waitress. I can see this one being a tough sell for most people, but if you like the movies it pays tribute to, specifically It Came from Outer Space, The Blob, and The Day the Earth Stood Still, you're more likely to get a kick out of it. References and parallels to these classics abound. Plus, it's not just set in the late 50s, it's supposed to have been made in the 50s, a monster movie epic that was supposedly destroyed. So, in addition to having period-appropriate slang, cars, and costumes, it abides by censorship rules regarding language and married couple decorum. You know, twin beds, one foot on the floor, that kind of thing. It was nice to see Robert Patrick in the cast, performing tongue-in-cheek as an incompetent sheriff's deputy. The overall corniness of the dialogue and acting, and the overblown artificiality of the lighting and the set design are all very intentional, but it's not my perception that the filmmakers just wanted to lampoon these old movies. I think they love them, and I appreciate the apparent sincerity and commitment to making the film feel as authentic as possible. I do wonder, though, why they didn't film it in black and white, like Tim Burton did with Ed Wood. The vibrant colors feel really modern and clash with the hyper 50s everything else, making it just a shade uncanny. But after a period of initiation, I thought the film turned out to be quite fun. And that takes care of January. I squeezed in a lot of movies this month, lots of great viewer recommendations, so I want to thank all of you who suggested these films for my perusal. I hope you enjoyed the video. You'll find a list of the movies I discussed in the description, along with a mention of where I found them. A lot of these movies are on YouTube. or at least they're currently on YouTube. They could all be taken down tomorrow. If you have thoughts on any of the films that I talked about on today's list, go ahead and share your opinion in the comments below, and I'll see you next week with another movie review. Thanks for watching.